As a pizza delivery driver, I thought I'd seen it all: creepy houses, strange customers, and even the occasional eerie encounter, but nothing prepared me for the night of the last delivery. It was nearing midnight when the call came in, an order from a house on the edge of town, isolated and surrounded by thick woods. The house had a sinister reputation. Locals whispered about strange disappearances and odd occurrences, but the hefty tip promised convinced me. After all, it was just another delivery. The road to the house was winding and narrow, shrouded in darkness with only my headlights cutting through the thick forest. The further I drove, the more my anxiety grew. Finally, I reached the house. It loomed large and dark, almost as if it were waiting for me. No lights, no sign of life. I knocked on the door, and it creaked open by itself. "Hello?" I called out, stepping inside cautiously. The smell of old wood and mildew filled my nostrils. There was no answer, just the echo of my voice. I ventured further in, the door slamming shut behind me. Panic set in, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm just here to deliver the pizza," I said, my voice trembling. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, slow and deliberate. I followed the sound to a room with a flickering candle. On a table, a dusty, old photo album lay open. Curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped through the pages. The photos were of families, all smiling, but as I reached the last few pages, the photos changed. They were of delivery drivers, all wearing uniforms from different pizza places, each looking terrified. Their eyes seemed to plead for help, frozen in eternal horror. The final page had a photo slot with a blank space labeled "Next." My heart raced as I realized the implications. I turned to leave, but a cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around to face an elderly man with hollow eyes. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his smile sent chills down my spine. "You're just in time for the family photo," he said, a sinister smile spreading across his face. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. He dragged me to a hidden door behind the bookshelf, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. "No," I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. Downstairs, the basement was filled with old, dusty cameras and a makeshift darkroom. Photos hung from mines, all depicting the same grim scene: terrified delivery drivers, their faces contorted in agony. The man forced me into a chair and positioned me in front of one of the cameras. As he prepared to take my photo, I saw movement in the shadows. The other delivery drivers emerged, their faces twisted and ghostly. They were trapped, bound to this house by the sinister force that controlled it. "Help us," one of them whispered, his voice a faint echo. The camera flashed, blinding me. When my vision cleared, I found myself alone in the dark room. The photos gone, the man vanished, the door to the basement creaked open, and I fled up the stairs, through the house, and out the front door. I never made it out of that house. They say my delivery car is still parked out front, engine running, with a fresh pizza growing cold in the passenger seat. If you look closely, you might see a new photo in that old album: a terrified delivery driver, frozen in time, pleading for help. I had been delivering pizzas for years, and late-night deliveries were nothing new. But the order from the abandoned house on Oak Street was different. The house had been vacant for years, a notorious spot for local ghost stories, the kind of place kids dared each other to visit but never did. But an order is an order. When I arrived, the house looked even more decrepit than I remembered. The front door was ajar, and the flickering porch light cast eerie shadows. "Hello? Pizza delivery." I called out, but there was no response. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The house was filled with old furniture, covered in dust and cobwebs. As I walked further in, I heard whispers, like a distant conversation. Following the sound, I found a room with a single lit candle. A table was set for dinner, but the food was rotten, and the chairs were overturned. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the corner of the room. A woman, pale and ghostly, stared at me with hollow eyes. "Please, help us," she whispered. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. She pointed to a door at the back of the room. "Down there," she said. "They're waiting." Against my better judgment, I opened the door and descended the stairs into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers grew louder. In the basement, I found a group of people, all pale and ghostly like the woman. They were bound by chains, their eyes filled with despair. "We are trapped," one of them said. "We cannot leave until the curse is broken." They explained that they were all previous residents, bound to the house by a malevolent spirit. Each one had been lured here by promises or deceit, only to become prisoners. Just then, the spirit appeared, a dark, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. It floated towards me, its presence suffocating. It lunged at me, but the ghostly residents formed a protective barrier. "Go," they shouted. "Leave while you can." I ran up the stairs and out of the house, never looking back. I reported the incident to my boss, but when the police arrived, they found the house empty. No ghosts, no basement, nothing. The next day, I noticed something out on my arm, a small, dark mark that hadn't been there before. Over the next few days, it grew and spread, forming a chain-like pattern around my wrist. The whispers followed me wherever I went, growing louder at night. Desperate, I returned to the house, hoping to find a way to break the curse, but the house was gone, replaced by an empty lot. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I could no longer ignore them. I started seeing shadows in the corners of my vision, feeling cold hands brush against my skin. The mark on my wrist tightened, the chains pulling me towards the woods where the house once stood. I knew I had to go back, to face whatever awaited me there. Under the cover of night, I walked to the empty lot, the whispers guiding me. As I stood in the center, the ground beneath me trembled, and the house reappeared, dark and foreboding. The front door creaked open, inviting me in. I stepped inside, the air thick with anticipation. The ghostly residents awaited me, their eyes pleading. "You must break the curse," the woman said, pointing to a dusty, old book on a pedestal. The book was filled with ancient symbols and incantations. As I read aloud, the shadows writhed and screamed, the house shaking violently. The chains around my wrist tightened, then shattered, freeing me. The spirits thanked me, their forms dissolving into the air. The house crumbled around me, leaving nothing but dust. I walked away, the whispers finally silenced. But the mark on my wrist remained, a reminder of the night I faced the horrors of the abandoned house on Oak Street. I was on the last delivery of my shift, eager to finish and head home. The address was unfamiliar, but the directions were clear. As I drove into the neighborhood, the houses became fewer and farther apart, until I was surrounded by dense forest. Finally, I found the house. It was an old Victorian, its windows dark and lifeless. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Just as I was about to leave, the door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, tall and thin, with a gaunt face and piercing eyes. "Come in," he said. "We've been expecting you." Reluctantly, I stepped inside. The air was heavy, and a sense of dread filled me. He led me to the dining room where a group of people sat around a table, all dressed in old-fashioned clothes. They stared at me, their expressions unreadable. "We're having a celebration," the man said, "and you're the guest of honor." I placed the pizza on the table, but no one moved to eat. Instead, they continued to stare, their eyes following my every move. "What is this?" I asked, feeling more uneasy by the second. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. When they came back on, the room was empty, the people had vanished, and I was alone. Panicking, I ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed shut, and my phone had no signal. As I searched for another way out, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see the man, now looking more sinister than ever. "You can't leave," he said. "You're part of the family now." Desperate, I grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and I climbed out, cutting myself in the process. I ran to my car and sped away, not stopping until I was back in town. I told my boss what happened, but when he sent someone to check the address, they found nothing but an empty lot. No house, no people, nothing. It was as if the house had never existed. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget the terror of that night. Months later, I received another late-night order, this time from a different part of town. The address seemed normal, but my heart pounded with anxiety as I approached. The house was small and nondescript, a far cry from the Victorian nightmare. I knocked, and a young woman answered. her smile warm and inviting. But as I handed her the pizza, I noticed a familiar mark on her wrist, a chain-like pattern, just like mine. "You must be new," she said, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "Welcome to the family." She stepped aside, revealing the same group of people from the Victorian house, now dressed in modern clothes. "You can never leave," she whispered, as the door slammed shut behind me. This time, there was no escape. The house had found me, and I was trapped, a prisoner of the sinister force that bound us all. And so, the cycle continued, each delivery driver becoming part of the disappearing act, forever haunted by the house that shouldn't exist. It was a stormy night when I received an order from Whispering Pines, an old neighborhood known for its grand, yet eerie houses. The address was unfamiliar, and as I navigated through the winding, tree-lined streets, a sense of unease settled over me. The wind howled through the pines, creating an almost whispering sound that sent chills down my spine. The house was a towering mansion, its windows dark and lifeless. Lightning illuminated the sky, casting eerie shadows on the ornate facade. I knocked on the heavy wooden door, and to my surprise, it creaked open slowly. "Hello? Pizza delivery," I called out, stepping into the dimly lit foyer. The smell of damp wood and old leather filled the air. The door slammed shut behind me, making me jump. I was now completely alone in the vast, silent mansion. I ventured further inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow me. I found the dining room, a long table set with dusty china and silverware, untouched for years. Suddenly, a whisper broke the silence. "Help us," it said, barely audible. I spun around but saw no one. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. "We're trapped," it continued. "Find the key." The whispers seemed to come from the walls themselves, guiding me to a grand staircase. I ascended cautiously, the old steps creaking under my weight. At the top, I found a locked door. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices begging for release. Desperate, I searched the nearby rooms for a key. In the master bedroom, I found an old diary on a dusty bedside table. It belonged to a woman named Eliza, who wrote about the mansion being cursed by an angry spirit seeking revenge on the family. She had hidden the key to break the curse, hoping someone brave would find it. Just then, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath in the air. A shadowy figure emerged from the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with malevolence. It lunged at me, and I barely managed to dodge it, the cold seeping into my bones. I ran back to the locked door, the whispers guiding me. In a nearby drawer, I found the key, old and ornate. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door, revealing a small, hidden room. Inside, a circle of candles surrounded an old mirror, cracked and covered in grime. As I stepped closer, the mirror began to glow. The whispers turned to screams, and the shadowy figure reappeared, more menacing than before. It lunged at me, but as it passed through the circle of candles, it disintegrated into a cloud of black smoke. The screams stopped, replaced by a peaceful silence. The mirror shattered, releasing a blinding light that enveloped the room. When the light faded, the house seemed to come alive, the old furniture looking vibrant and new. I fled the mansion, my heart pounding. The storm had passed, and the night was calm. I reported the incident to my boss, but when the authorities arrived, they found the mansion empty, its doors and windows boarded up. No sign of life, no hidden room, nothing. But I know what I experienced, and I'll never forget the whispers of Whispering Pines. It was a cold winter night, and I was working the night shift at the pizzeria. Business was slow, and I was looking forward to clocking out. Just as I was about to close up, the phone rang. A voice on the other end ordered a pizza to a place I'd never heard of. Blackwood Manor. The manor was situated deep in the countryside, far from town. As I drove through the narrow, winding roads, my headlights barely pierced the darkness. The snow-covered trees loomed overhead, creating an eerie tunnel. I finally arrived at the manor, a sprawling estate surrounded by iron gates. The place looked abandoned, its windows dark and empty. I pushed open the creaking gate and made my way to the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open on its own. "Hello? Pizza delivery," I called out, stepping inside. The air was cold and stale, the only light coming from a dim chandelier overhead. I ventured further into the manor, the door slamming shut behind me. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries, and old ornate furniture filled the rooms. As I walked through the grand hallway, I heard faint music, like an old gramophone playing in the distance. Following the sound, I found a parlor with a roaring fireplace, the gramophone spinning an old record. A figure stood by the fireplace, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "We've been expecting you." I placed the pizza on a nearby table, but the man didn't move. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned to face me, revealing hollow sunken eyes. "You're just in time for the party," he said with a sinister smile. Before I could react, the room filled with ghostly figures, all dressed in formal attire. They began to dance, their movements stiff and unnatural. The music grew louder, more distorted, as the figures closed in around me. Panicking, I backed away, bumping into an old bookshelf. A book fell to the floor, opening to a page with a drawing of the manor and a group of people standing outside. As I looked closer, I realized the people in the drawing were the same ghostly figures surrounding me. The man stepped forward, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "You must join us," he said, reaching out a cold hand. I stumbled back, knocking over a candlestick. The flame caught on the old drapes, quickly spreading through the room. The ghost screamed and vanished as the fire consumed the parlor. I ran for the door, the heat and smoke choking me. I burst outside, the cold air hitting me like a wave. Behind me, the manor burned, the flames lighting up the night sky. I reported the fire to the authorities, but when they arrived, they found no trace of the manor. The grounds were empty, the snow undisturbed. No fire, no house, nothing. Shaken, I returned to the pizzeria, my mind racing. The next day, I found an old newspaper clipping about Blackwood Manor, detailing a fire that had burned it down decades ago. The residents were trapped inside, their spirits doomed to relive the night of the fire. I'll never forget the night shift at Blackwood Manor, and the ghostly figures that tried to make me one of their own. If you love horror stories, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.